Good evening. It's weird being on a hike, but hi. So I thought I'd start with who am I and why am I here? So my name's Josh and I've been at Sky for 4 years since I left Uni of Leeds. I'm a business analyst and I'm really enthusiastic about how that works in Agile. In my time at Sky, I've done a bit of everything. So Scrum, Kanban, Scrumban. Every team's got their own way of doing these things. We can put labels on them, but they're all slightly different. And if you asked anyone at Sky, who's Josh? Well, he's the big guy with the big beard, the one that looks a bit like a bear. So yeah, that's me. And so why am I here? Well, I've been looking at that experience that I've got across these teams and with their very different methods and trying to understand where my role really provides value and looking at the techniques that I've found really useful in that time and maybe building on them a little bit in more recent times, and thought I had some interesting stuff to come and talk to you all about tonight. So what does a business analyst do in an agile team? I took a slightly different approach to this and firstly looked at what my teams would generally think I do. So if I went to my developers and say, what do you think I do? I think this is a lot of the list that I get. So I'm always in meetings. I'm helping them break down things from new work down into epics and stories. I'm writing the user stories. I'm writing acceptance criteria. You might get the joking phrase of card monkey. We've all heard it before. But this is where we really provide the value. So that upfront analysis on projects, the cost benefit analysis, the why are we doing this, and really being that conscience for the product owner. So making sure that anyone that brings in a piece of work, no matter their title, that they're the product owner, whether it's product manager or even CEO, going back to some of John's talk. My job is to be there and asking them, why are we doing this and what's the value? So being that conscience and trying to be their proxy if they're not available. So we should have a good enough relationship with them that if they're off or, God forbid, they get hit by a bus tomorrow, we're going to be okay because the analyst knows what the team's meant to be doing. But if you distill all of that down to the most crucial sentiment there, it's about getting the right information to the engineers, and that's making sure that they can build the right thing. So whether it's cards, whether it's just talking to them, whether it's any of the stuff I mentioned so far, it all distills to right information to the right people, so we're building the right thing. Quick show of hands for me. Who's heard of the three amigos as a technique? Good. So it's a technique I found fantastically useful at Sky. So traditionally a meeting of a business analyst, a tester and a developer to do a specification workshop for the piece of work. So looking at the tests that need writing, the requirements, and really coming to that shared understanding. For me, the three part of this is the loosest part. It should be 3 or more, but if it's a bigger group, then great, because you're getting a wider consensus. And it's great because it enforces that collaboration. And enforces is quite a strong word. Encourages is maybe better, but it's all about working together and between the roles. So are we writing our requirements together? If we're doing automated tests, are we writing the tests together? And really making sure that the team all agree that something's actually ready to be built. Because there's nothing worse than a team getting halfway through something and saying, we weren't ever ready for this. Because it comes back to the waste that we were talking about earlier on. And the crucial part is the shared understanding. When we leave that specification workshop, that Three Amigos session, we all agree that this is the meaning behind that piece of work. And its strength is that the crucial difference between written communication and verbal communication. So, as was the requirements can be interpreted based on our filters, based on our experience, or just based on our own opinion of what the piece of work should be. And as John alluded to earlier on, sometimes a developer just won't read the ticket. And this is a way of making sure that whether they do that or not, we've agreed it, agreed what the piece of work is and where the value's coming from, why we're doing it. It helps enforce the pull model that a lot of us will be familiar with. So pulling work into the next stage rather than pushing it forward. So if you make this a mandatory part of your process, it can really help enforce that. Obviously, by having that shared understanding, by collaborating and clarifying, we should reduce bugs. We should reduce the amount of time wasted, and absolutely crucially, we reduce the time spent working on the wrong thing. The things I would note from my experience with it is that if you go from saying it's a mandatory part of the process to we should do this most of the time, but sometimes we might not, devs will treat that as an excuse for not doing it, and then it disappears, and then it's like going back to before when you didn't have it, and you see a lot of the problems coming back. On the other side of that, though, by making it a must-have, it becomes a bit of a blocker, and that requires some careful management around BA's time and making sure that they're available to actually carry out that session.
So on that slide, could you just say what did you mean by the, I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch what you meant by the pull rather than the push.
So you'll often see systems with in and out, and it's about a role saying, I'm done with this piece of work when you are ready to take it forward, rather than here it is and lobbing it over to the next role in the process. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So, having preached about this technique internally at Sky for a long time, I started thinking about me and when I first really became aware of it. And actually, I think I was using it a long time before I was aware of it, and not in its most prescriptive form, as it would be described on the page. But one of my teams back in London was, I always think of it as the most agile team I've been in. So our user stories they were sometimes one word, but they were rarely more than a sentence. We didn't use Jira. We weren't using any sort of ticketing system other than cards on a board. We didn't have acceptance criteria. Basically, we paired a lot, and that meant both developers pairing with each other, but also myself pairing with them. So anytime anything came up during development or beforehand, or anytime there was a question, we'd just hit pause, have a quick chat, and come back to that shared understanding. So I think I really was using this a long time before I'd actually clocked that it was a thing. But the crucial difference being that it was sort of more regular than just an upfront thing before a ticket started being developed. And then, so you're probably all aware, we all work in Leeds. Sky moved to Leeds about 18 months ago. I don't know if you'd heard. And it was an opportunity I jumped to be part of. So I'd worked in London for a while and then moved up to Leeds and then moved back to the teams I'd been in. So you've got a situation with lots of brand new developers. I think I'm the only member of the whole area of teams that I was working in who'd had any exposure to it before the transition. Our teams had no tester. We had a very short handover of a month at most. And we struggled with shared understanding of tickets and with people having opinions on what was the right thing. And so there was a time when we decided that the Three Amigos was something that would be useful as part of our process. And so that became useful, but it's got the downsides that I talked about earlier on, and it is just a sort of pre-dev thing. And so my old Scrum Master's actually in the room, and he'll tell you that I harped on about this stuff for a while, but joked about extending it. So it shouldn't just happen just before, and talking about, all these conversations I was having during development previously. And we all like patterns of three. So in my head, it was pre 3 and re, and that stuck in my head for a while. And I'll dig into what each one is, but I think this rounds it out quite nicely. So pre-Amigos, we saw a lot of problems with things coming towards development that weren't ready for dev. Now, obviously that's something we talked about earlier as being solved by the 3 Amigos. But the reason for this session for me is twofold. One, it's about highlighting blockers early on so that the analyst or the Scrum Master are often solving those problems. But the second is more around the technical discussions that need to happen. So if something's a particularly complex piece of work, a developer or the development team might need a while to think about it. So having a session with 3 or ideally more of your team where something's in the backlog and not necessarily about to come in, but you're just getting a bit of a, what is this ticket? How are we going to approach it as a team? It's really useful, and it gets them thinking about how they're going to do it when it comes to time. And obviously allows us to go away and remove the blockers before they become blockers. I won't go back over the 3 Amigos too much because I've already talked through the theory enough, but reinforcing that, so making it a more crucial thing, has to happen. It has to happen before a ticket's picked up. And if we've had a pre-Amigo session with 3 or more, ideally, most of the people that were in that, so at least 2 if it was only 3, should be the same people when it's picked up, so that that shared understanding is carried through. The reason I would argue it's most, not all, is that if you've got most, you're sharing that knowledge further, and then the person that was in originally can always come back into the conversation later. Great knowledge sharing technique, and particularly as we've just gone through this massive transition, really good for bringing everyone up to speed. And then re-Amigos, so demoing things to ideally the group so that everyone that was aware of this piece of work can actually come back and say, yeah, that's what I expected it to be. Yeah, that does everything I expected. All the tests pass. It's ready to ship. So if I compare that to the most agile team I was talking about earlier, that extreme example of us all talking and barely writing anything down, that's not going to work for most teams, and I completely concede that. This is a much more pragmatic approach of a simple process that you can put in place to encourage those behaviours without necessarily dictating a quite extreme behaviour change. It will improve communication, so you're going to be talking more regularly throughout the process, and you're making sure that nothing gets into dev or out the door without a group of people agreeing that it's the right thing. It enforces collaboration, and it's encouraging knowledge share. And coming back to that original point, it's making sure that we're building the right thing. There's nothing as important as that. And those of you that clocked the title before, you'll have noticed that it said an alternative approach to agile analysis. And some of you are thinking, well, you know, this is a bit different, but why is it alternative? For me, it's about focusing more on verbal communication and on gaining of shared understanding than about writing tickets. So many agile analysts that I talk to, it's all about getting their acceptance criteria down, getting tickets onto a backlog, and then running off and doing the next one. And it's those mini waterfalls that are the trap that we can fall into. This at least pulls us back away from that and to a more collaborative approach. That's me. Thank you very much.